of like what the qualifiers are for that, and then we just like label other people that, or we label ourselves that. And a lot of people in the West also seem to rotate labels very quickly. Like one week they're a socialist, and the next week they're like a monarchist. Then the next week they're a liberal. Then the next week they're this. The next week they're that. Primarily with younger people, but I see this with people of all ages. Ideologies are just like, it's like changing your clothing. So I think that a lot of people might find, based on that, issue we have here, hearing the words liberalism leads to fascism sounds absurd on its face. It's like, how could that possibly be true? But if you look at the historical development of fascism as it actually developed in Italy, Germany, and France, and Spain to a certain extent, it's actually a totally not controversial or non-controversial thing to say. All of the fascist movements were supported by industrialists. The wealthy class, finance capital, that kind of thing. And the fascists were the hired thugs sent to crush the socialists and the communists for the benefit of bourgeois democracy. So it's just not that controversial of a point. And I was hoping, in this discussion to be able to like clarify that rather than just get into like a real shit throwing fest about it. Just clarify like historically what all this stuff means, and where I thought Charmhole might have been going and where I'm coming from when I say liberalism is, or fascism is the psychosis of liberalism, or as other people have said, liberalism collapses into fascism inevitably.
All right, thank you. I'm going to pass it off to Hippie Jesus next. Just to be clear, Non-Smoker and Charmhole, y'all went for like roughly 2.5 minutes for your opening, so I'm just going to give Alpha and Alec the same amount of time to respond as well. So go ahead, Hippie. And you're muted.
I wanted to talk to my chat, not you guys. So with the debate that we are having today, which just let it be known is the debate that Charmhole challenged the entire Discord to, was does liberalism lead to fascism? Now, to actually have this debate, I think we need to have a healthy understanding of what both of these terms mean. So I have both terms up here, and I'm going to read to you fascism just to show that it is absolutely different than what liberalism espouses. Fascism is considered a political philosophy characterized by the belief that government should use coercion and force to rule the people, usually by means of a mass-based, militant, ultra-nationalist political party. Throughout history, fascist governments have killed or imprisoned large populations of specific races, nationalities, and people of different religions, and have used violent means to increase their power both internally and externally. By looking at that definition and realizing that liberalism is about the individual's rights and privileges that they have in a certain country, whether that be speech, religion, press, or assembly. All of these things would not be allowed in a fascist government, and I implore our opponents to define it or even try to disprove that. And you can find me at twitch.tv/alphawasabi.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Alec.
All right, my name's Alec Gunther. You can find me at twitch.tv/Alec Gunther. That's AlecGunter. You can also find me at youtube.com/AlecGunterTTV. Basically, I don't know. I didn't know exactly what I was walking into. I don't have the full context from the Discord conversation. I just heard that this was something about liberalism leads to fascism or some such. And then I read Charmhole's comment in the Discord, bolding some words and comparing the two. So I'm not exactly sure still where Charmhole stands on it, but I can take some guesses. But my stance is liberalism. When we say liberalism leads to fascism, I think it's really important. As Non-Smoker was saying, I actually agree with a few of his points. It's important to clarify what we mean by that. I don't think that liberals in and of themselves are fascist. I think that in many ways they support fascism unwittingly through their actions and lack thereof. So take, for instance, the global industrial complex of like child slavery. I think liberals would be inclined to defend that for the sake of the economy. But when you're looking at just strictly within a country, if we saw that like Walmart was literally enslaving little white kids in their basement and forcing them to file their taxes or whatever, they'd take issue with that because it's happening in our country, and that's scary. So I think liberalism is kind of a brain disease that can allow fascism to progress and fester. And that's why leftism is here to combat that. Unfortunately, we do have to prop up liberals because they believe in social progressivism at the very least for our own nation. Even if for other nations, they would argue that it's their culture or whatever bullshit. But I don't think liberals themselves are fascist. They allow fascism to take root without much contest. That's kind of my view on it.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and with that, I'll move on to the open. Just want to remind you guys: try not to talk over each other too much. Try not to monologue too much. I think what I'm going to do, I'll just pass it off to you, Charmhole, and kind of give you a chance to clarify your position, I guess, and reorient yourself in the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. Somehow I got switched around into thinking that it was all going to be about how conservatism is already communism, and like that's kind of like juxtaposes against liberalism, especially the psychosis of liberalism leads to actual fascism, right? So I think I got a little mixed up because like I started thinking about how we've got all right, so we'll start with the definition, right? I think everybody can agree liberalism is a political and moral philosophy based on the rights of the individual, liberty, consent of the governed, political equality, and equality before the law. Now that law really does equality before the law. That's a lot of heavy lifting, right? Like, what does the law mean exactly? And I think most Americans can agree, both sides, that when we think about the law, it isn't so much about justice or what's fair, it's about what's in the Constitution. And it's about all of the justice, the systems of justice that we've put in place, right? The state justice, national justice, the State Department, of course, and how we read that off of the Constitution. So when we enforce that, well, just real quick, just when we enforce that, we're effectively talking about people who own the land, landowners, right? Now, technically in America, the majority still is individually owned, right? Mom and pop ownerships of land, effectively. But that's mostly like land, like per square inch, right? That's not like, say, monetarily, right? So the police are there for landowners, effectively. The state is there for their own state, right? It makes sense. Obviously, they want to defend their land. Like Indiana wants to defend their land. Same with Wisconsin, Florida. They'll need to do what needs to be done. So when we talk about fascism, that's, again, the psychosis. That's the Constitution gone crazy, right? And I don't think it's that hard to imagine what happens when a conservative goes crazy versus a liberal goes crazy. Or, by extension, liberal society going nuts, / fascist, or a conservative society going crazy, right? And I think conservatism already knows, we already understand that to be proletariat already is, you need to have authority over yourself, right? You need to have authority over your family and your land. It's that authority is already implied, right? But a lot of people want to say it's fascism. They want to hurry up, like say, oh, the national family, oh, that's fascist, oh, that's authoritarian, right? Like it's all those things. Well, I think they can agree that it's authoritarian. Yes, the authority, the paternal figure, we are, like the daddy is saying no, right? Like that's already implied. So with liberalism, the authority is then hyper focused on the state authority, and from that it becomes warped, and we're in that warp right now. We're in this current, I believe, massive change where we can kind of let conservatism truly bloom into communism and belt down the liberals, effectively. So, use some belts on them to extend the paternal metaphor.
I have to know where you are getting this idea that conservatism leads to communism and what you think communism means.
Conservatism is already communism. It's just we are conditioned through liberal media not to accept it. Like McCarthyism, we've flipped it around. unfortunately, in our heads. So, like, and instead we say, oh, actually, Russia and the communists in China, they're more like Nazis. They're they're nationalist fascists, right? They're nationalist authoritarian. It's like, well, they're communists, and then, you know, and they are defending their land and their tradition, right? I don't see how.
Well, they take the moniker.
They're not killing to kill, like out of some psychosis. They're not like. That's what I think fascism is like. Truly fascist is, it's crazy, it's horrible, it's like a black hole of death and destruction that's like almost like a fiery explosion of politic.
China and the like take the moniker of communism without themselves actually being communist. They just say that they're like the People's Republic. I know, dude. I know.
Well,
but that's a whole nother argument.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Not to cut you guys off, but
You know, let's try to stay on topic at least.
I don't. Okay. Okay. So, did you want to go non-smoker?
yeah, I mean, maybe
Sure.
just quickly like address Alpha's point, because okay, so pulling up the definition, look, it's reasonable to do that. Okay, I understand why somebody would do that, but it's not good to reduce everything down to like what Google says. What we should ask ourselves is, why does Google describe it that way? Like, or maybe a better question might be, what was the phenomena that Google is describing? What was it in its totality? How it actually manifested in history, in real life, right? And when you look at fascist movements in Italy, which is really like the prototypical fascist movement, it was really the first nominal fascist movement. In some sense, it was really the only true, in that sense, fascist movement. Obviously, most people agree that in the Spanish Civil War, there was a fascist movement. There was a fascist movement in France while being occupied by Nazi Germany, and most people describe Nazi Germany as fascist. I agree with all of those, but I'm just trying to like delineate everything out so it's clear. But when you look at the rise of fascism in Italy, the reason that, like your question was, how can, if liberalism has contrary values to fascism, how can they possibly work together? And what's really interesting is that the bourgeois liberal class in Italy did not resist Mussolini whatsoever when he came to power. The army was actually not turned on Mussolini during the March on Rome. And he was formally given the prime ministership in Italy. Despite being this, you know, antithetical or anti-liberal figure in every way possible. And the problem is liberalism rests so much on individual freedom that it permits individual freedom even to individuals who resist or purport to be against those same principles. So in this instance, it just is a natural outgrowth of everybody being able to express, you know, their own views, whatever they might be. And the reason that these fascist movements tend to gain traction is not even always popular support, although that's part of it. It's that the state tends to fund them. And by the state, I mean the bourgeois liberal state. So it might interest you to know that Mussolini was supported by MI5, British intelligence.
Whoa! No way.
Yeah. Hitler was
Literally
supported
British
by...
Fabians. Yeah, true.
Could I
Hitler
push?
was... Well, just hold on. Hitler was supported by British industrialists, American industrialists, and German industrialists, and the bourgeois class.
It was almost like it was a civil war.
It's very clear.
Anglo-Civil War.
Right. It's very clear that there's a correlation between liberalism and fascism insofar as liberal capitalists, will fund the fascist movement. And the question should be, why did they fund them? And they funded them specifically to resist socialist uprisings in Germany and in Italy.
I'll cut you off there. Real quick, non-smoking, you went for like a little over like 3 minutes there, so I want to give Alec and Hippie just that same amount of time to respond to what you were saying.
Oh yeah.
When you say the government is funding these fascist projects, I don't necessarily disagree. But would you? I think it's misallocating the actual people who are interested in keeping like the separation of classes, right? You have the wealthy upper class elites, the bourgeois, whatever, who ultimately are pushing policy and paying off government officials to keep the separation of the wealth classes. And this is kind of what we see in capitalism happen all the time. It inevitably leads to that, where we have such a separation between wealth classes, of such a divide, that when a fascist solution is offered, it gives a lot of people hope. It lets people. It's a very easy way of thinking of things, where it's like, oh, it's not the entire structure that's bad. It's the black guy living down the street or something like that, And so they get these radical ideas, and that leads to this entire movement against groups of people and ousting of these groups of people, and eventually, this can lead to an overtaking of an entire society, such as the one we saw in Nazi Germany. So I think that the real people pushing it is not necessarily the government. It's more like the business owners. What do you think about that?
Looter, it's cool if I respond. Because I went, okay. Yeah, so in terms of there being... So look, let me just cut through directly to what your point is. Is there popular fascist support, regardless of state support of fascist movements? My argument is that initially fascists exist on the fringes, but there definitely is fascist support. Those movements wouldn't exist at all if nobody supported them. But what I'm arguing is that, and actually fascism in Italy was a splinter off of Italian socialism. Mussolini was famously a socialist. Originally, he was part of the Italian Socialist Party. But in the case of Mussolini and one of his idols, Georges Sorel in France, they considered themselves more so like syndicalists than they did pure socialists. So they were kind of like revisionist Marxists. Basically what it was is they rejected class warfare, at least the traditional definition of class warfare. Sorel believed that if the proletariat overcame the bourgeoisie, inevitably another bourgeoisie would spring up and contend with the proletariat for state power. So he proposed rallying people with a national myth, all this stuff, all the things that are central tenets of fascism. I'm getting off topic. The point is, yes, there is support of fascists among people. And just like socialism, that's an outgrowth of the material conditions of capitalism, classes being separate, just as you said, and resentments among classes and all that kind of stuff. But what's interesting is that the state opts to support the fascists, sometimes with funding, sometimes directly just handing power over to them, because they would prefer the fascists in power than the socialists, because the fascists don't actually intend to do anything to correct the class structure.
I do agree with that to an extent. I think that, we saw a lot of Democrats, the Democratic National Committee, basically just like telling Bernie Sanders, no, you literally can't run, So I do agree with that to an extent. They'd rather have a conservative / fascist in power than a leftist. So
I'm going to pass it off to Alpha Wasabi or Hippie Jesus if you want to add anything. Give you a little bit of time here.
Yeah, when it comes to the Italian fascism with Benito Mussolini, who was the other candidate for prime minister?
When Mussolini came to power, it was literally the prime ministership he wasn't running for an election. He was literally
No, but there were two people up to become prime minister. The king had to choose between the two. Do you know who the other one was?
I don't know much about the other candidate for prime minister.
Okay, the other candidate was someone who was a part of the Italian Socialist Party, and the king at the time would rather have Mussolini a fascist than a socialist.
Yeah,
because by that time,
you're making my point. You're actually making my point.
Yeah, I realize, but you're saying that he was given it. He wasn't just given it because of the good ideas.
No,
Benito Mussolini was not a socialist by that time. He had denounced the Socialist Party at that time.
What I'm suggesting to you is that when the fascists seized power in Italy, there was no resistance from the state whatsoever, despite the fact that they did so in many stages, not simply the prime ministership of Mussolini, many stages, completely undemocratically. There was no violent response from the Italian state to the fascists coming to power. And more importantly, perhaps, the three biggest supporters of Mussolini's rise to power were all wealthy Italian entrepreneurs, industrialists, business magnates, who ended up being appointed into high positions in Mussolini's economic administration while in
There
power.
you go.
Because
Yeah,
Mussolini
learned.
drove out all opposition in parliament.
Right, but okay, but at the end of the day, in essence, you're just furthering my point that the Italian state proved in a very clear moment where power was breaking down to hand power over to the fascists in many stages, by the way, not simply the prime ministership, simply to avoid power being turned over to the socialists. Now, what's interesting about the socialists in Italy is that their popular base of support exploded after the end of the First World War. The Italian Socialist Party became I think it grew 10 times in terms of membership within a short year period. They called it the 2 years of red in Italy. So the socialist movement had mass popular support. The fascists were fairly marginal in comparison. They got a lot of their power and therefore a lot of their awareness to the public at large, and then by nature of that popular support, with the assistance of not only the Italian state but also the British one.
So I guess the next question I'm going to ask you is, how is what happened in Italy an example of liberalism leading to this? Because it wasn't the people voicing this. It wasn't the people winning Mussolini in office. It was the prime minister that just appointed him prime minister.
Right. And so that's where I think a lot of the confusion comes in about liberalism versus leftism, liberalism versus socialism, and all that kind of stuff. You have to keep in mind that the Italian state, in essence, was a liberal capitalist state, just like most of Europe was at that time. Now, that means different things at different, there's obviously differentiation between different governments, policies, where power is concentrated, how power is handed down, is it democratic, is it an appointment basis, etc. But at the end of the day, all of these countries fundamentally are capitalist liberal countries, right? They believe in the idea, because capitalism is really the foundational piece of liberalism. It's like liberalism exists to defend the rights of the individual solely because during when the commons were being fenced off in England in the 16th century and the 17th century, the whole ideology of liberalism sprung forth from that to try and argue after the English Civil War that people needed individual property rights. And it's basically a whole philosophical defense of individual property rights. John Locke famously, life, liberty, and property, right? So all capitalist systems are liberal in their essence, even if they don't have the same, quote, Western modern liberal values we have today. They're all, in fact, liberal systems. So even though this wasn't a democratic transition of power, it absolutely was a liberal state handing power over to a fascist.
Beep boop. There you go. I mean, geez, wow. You're quite the gamer when it comes to European liberal authority in the 1900s. Ooh. Wow, that's better than what I had to say.
History teacher.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, I'm just a gamer. So, yeah. But
Yeah, I mean, Alec or Hippie Jesus. I mean, if y'all want to take a few minutes to respond to that, feel free to go ahead. I'll give you all the same amount of time that he had.
Honestly, I'm not historically literate enough on Italian history to kind of, combat any of that. And honestly, if all of that is accurate, I can't say that I disagree too much. I mean, I do think that liberal societies tend to cede way to fascism if they're allowed to, because at the end of the day, liberals do side with fascists over leftists. That's just, at least to defend the economic prosperity of a country. I do think that's true.
Well, so just real quick, I feel like this is kind of one of the main reasons why the word schizo, the term schizo, is being thrown around so much recently. I think that American politics, sorry Europe, but I think American politics specifically since we're taught wrong, since we're kind of inverted here, we think that liberalism is leftism, right? So then you have like this, oh, gay space communism, kind of a meme in the liberal circles. So the liberals think like, oh yeah, that means since we fetishize this, that means we're actually leftists, right? And then communists, conservatives, American conservatives, and by that I mean like working class, physical working class people, since they're also taught the wrong things, like McCarthyism, like I said, did a doozy on this country, making them think that, oh, conservatives, you're not actually to the right, you aren't actually with the people, right, or your family, right, you are actually like just anti-state, right, which is a kind of way of saying anti-liberal state. So they ended up kind of, while still continuing to do mostly communist values, they think though that it's still somehow separate from Chinese communism, which it definitely is. It's American communism would look a lot different than Chinese communism, absolutely. Like they're different cultures. It absolutely would look something like totally different, most likely. However, if you just look at the meat and potatoes of exactly like what people's politics are, what their day-to-day is, why they're clocking in, who they're paying money to, who's paying them, right? It really comes down to being able to come to terms. Like it sucks because how hard is it to re-educate yourself, right? I'm in my 30s, I'm almost in my 40s. I've been trying to work this stuff out. I want to solve the political puzzles. I want to solve these political puzzles in America because I'm just bored of them. I'm bored of these same ass things that I've been hearing since the 90s. We're in the 2020s. I want to move on. I want to evolve. I want to progress. Truly.
I'll make it very simple for you. Your boss hates you, and he wants you to suffer. That's the puzzle solved. Your boss wants to make sure that people are as segmented as possible. That's why we live in suburbs. That's why they don't. That's why, even within cities, like people are still very individualistic these days. That's why that people are, there's all these phone apps to keep us distracted from everybody else. Yeah. They want us to spend our money, they want us to spend our time, and they want us to spend everything that we have on making them more wealthy. And the best way to do that is to keep us, separated and hating each other.
It's a sort of, well, absolutely. So it becomes a sort of soft fascism, right? It's a soft authority. It's not a direct authority. It's not cops lined up saying you can't move here. It's the bank saying we can't approve of your mortgage, right? Like
I'm not sure if I would call that soft fascism. As far as there can even be soft fascism, I don't know to what extent that's possible. Fascism is a very overt ousting of entire groups of people based on either characteristics that are beyond their own control, or beliefs that are harming, like religious beliefs that don't harm anybody.
So the working class, they're harming the working class. You said that, like, that's the class, that's the type of people, that's the race of people. The haplogroup is that working class. They are segmenting us away from each other. They're trying to convince you that Starbucks workers are the proletariat and the working class, right?
Where I'm getting confused is you say that conservatism is ultimately leading to communism, and I just don't understand that.
Because conservatives,
hold on, hear me out. When you look at conservatives right now, what do they want? They want suburbs. They want the white picket fence. They want the separation of people into like white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods, even though they'll never say that directly. It's about economics, right, and house values. That's what they mean when they say that. They want individualism. They want cars, right? Fox News is now going on a rant about how the leftists want to take away our cars. We kind of do, because public transport is a lot more environmentally feasible, and sorry, excuse me. On top of that, it's it brings us closer together. If we had ways to walk to work, or if we could take a trolley or something and actually talk to our fellow person, we would socialize more, we would be more of a collective, and we would be more of a threat to the powers that be, our bosses, right? So
Yeah, and if you talk to any working class people that you're you're claiming to talk for, like they'd all, every single one of them, talk about they want more money in their pocket, they want more money from their paycheck, they want more individuals, and they even talk about, because me as a liberal working in a conservative field, talking to them and understanding what they want and their ideas, just so we can have an actual conversation about it, they are talking about, well, what about their self-responsibility? What about them taking responsibility for their own actions, or taking responsibility for themselves? They don't care about the community. They don't care about other people. They worry about themselves and themselves alone, because that's the only thing that they have is themselves.
They worry about themselves. They're forced to, because they don't have the means to take care of themselves without working at least 40 hours a week.
So
go ahead.
Well, I believe you guys are attempting to appeal to the more central conservatives, the centrist conservatives, and the more centrist liberals in America.
Well, I'm talking about strictly about the working class people that you're espousing, because I work in a conservative field. I'm an electrician. I talk to these people every goddamn day.
Well, what does more
and I'm telling you
mean?
What they're saying.
What does more money mean, right? Like, truly, for a lot of people, it means covering debts, specifically, usually tied to land ownership, right, or asset ownership, right? So, like,
it's about them
like
wanting
houses.
less taxes and them wanting
That's
to buy
still,
more
less taxes
things.
is still more money, though.
And so I'm answering your question of what more money means. I'm answering your question.
But I'm not asking. I'm saying this
well,
is.
You did.
It was rhetorical. I know. I'm saying it like that's. Oh, what does it mean? It means this. Like, yes, we know exactly. It means more money, truly. It means more freedom. It means more choices in the markets that are available to us, right? So this is what we want. When we say, like, when conservatives specifically say, oh, yeah, well, we want more money. Yeah, they want more agency, of course. And liberals are the same way. They say, oh, well, I want more agency. I want more power. They don't necessarily like say like, oh yeah, I want to be rich, or I want to be famous. It's more like they want to be accepted in their ways, which is a lot to take in when it becomes, kind of like progress of culture versus traditionalism. And I think that like little nugget, that little diamond that gets pressured into our conventional wisdom and into our political sphere, our socius, what we're always fucking talking about. I think that is what that diamond is. Unfortunately, the focus often is. It's like there's real progress, which is just this like literally psychotic imagination of how fashion and cultures can change and create new opportunities, right? That gets pressured into and like shoved down the throat of more traditional people who just want simple agency rather than more contrived or fantasy agency, which I'm not saying is bad. I think it's cool. I think it's almost religious to attempt to be like, oh yeah, queerness is my identity, like holy, right? I think that's impressive.
Okay,
Cool.
So,
yeah.
Since you're
so we're at the
talking
root
about
of it.
today,
I figured this is where this was going. Go ahead.
So since we're talking about today, going back to what the original topic is, can liberalism leading to fascism? Do you think anywhere today, America, the UK, Germany, Britain, France, can fascism happen today through the liberal institutions that we have today?
When Biden and both AOC voted against the railroad workers who were attempting to unionize for just a few days off in the world, that was liberal, psychotic fascism. Hold hands down. Nobody disagrees with this, right? Hopefully.
I think it was liberalism. I don't know if I'd say it was fascism. It was liberalism.
How is it not fascism?
That was liberalism.
Because fascism is a very liberal. You cannot call AOC a fascist.
It was her vote. I'm not saying she's a fucking Nazi. I'm not saying she's an insane.
I don't think you're saying that.
What I'm saying is her vote against those railroad workers. That vote was psychotic, liberally fascist.
Why?
It wasn't. I don't want to say why. I want to.
No. I want you to say why. I want you to substantiate what you're saying, Charles.
But no,
why was it fascist?
I will if you guys say how it wasn't fascist.
No, that's not our job. Your job
But then
is
it's
to
implied
substantiate the
fascism.
positive.
No,
It
no,
is not our
the
job.
fascism is implied. So if
No,
it's so,
it's not. You
if you can,
it's the implication.
If you
it's
can,
the implication,
it is.
right?
It is how
And
yeah,
Luger, you gotta
exactly.
get these guys under control,
Exactly.
bro.
Yeah. So I need you to substantiate because
So then
the
how
burden
is
of
it-
proof is not on me.
How is it?
Sorry,
If
the
you're
burden of
so
proof is
convinced,
on
Real
me.
quick, Charmhole, Hippie, y'all shut the fuck up. All right, Charmhole, go ahead. Please explain. Please answer the question that the Hippie's asking you.
if I just want to say that if it's so easily implied that it isn't fascist, it should be easy to say why it isn't fascist, right? So hopefully you'll say that, but otherwise,
Why doesn't
here's how
God exist?
here's how I think it's implied fascism, which is a form like Alec had been talking about. It's a
I'll give
form
you 30 seconds to
of
explain it, Charmhole, and I'll
soft
pass it off to
fascism.
Hippie or Alec.
What?
I'll give you 30 seconds to hash it out, and then I'll pass it off to Alec or Hippie.
All right, yeah, no, it's just if like I don't see how it couldn't be fascist for the state, the nation to vote for squelching and stopping workers from being able to strike against their own employer. This is a destruction of freedom at the highest to most bottom level, from the bourgeois highest level to the working class foundation. Like, and to say that massive amount of power, to say you cannot even question about saying that you get a sick day. How is that not fascist? That is pure fascism.
It's bad. I'll cede you that. It's bad. And it's liberal, it's liberal brain rot. And it's authoritarian. It is. The reason it's not fascist is because fascism focuses specifically on immutable characteristics or religious beliefs that, frankly, don't hurt anybody, is the best way I can put it.
The immutable
Fascism is a little
characteristic
bit,
is the foundation, is the proletariat. That's the immutable.
Fascism is a little bit less coherent in its purpose and its aim. Basically, liberal capitalism is more aimed at keeping the classes separate and keeping their monetary value separate. Yeah. So that was liberal authoritarianism. It wasn't fascism.
All right, non-smoker, go ahead, man.
So there's actually two arguments you could make in support of Charmhole, at least two I would make. One is, Alec, are you familiar with corporatism? The fascist model of economics, or the fascist...
Isn't that just the end stage of capitalism, basically? Or before fascism, I guess?
Not exactly. A lot of people hear the word corporatism and they assume that corporatism means, government run by corporations, which is, we have a government run by corporations now, but corporatism it's very similar to an economic system called syndicalism. But basically the idea is that all trades are organized into like one big union, basically, and employer and employee relations are managed by the state from like a top-down basis. And it's different than socialism because, these industries still run for a profit. It's not like they only produce things that people need. They produce things for a profit, but it's like on a command basis by the state. And the state also manages employer and employee relations within these trades. So you could argue this is an example of like a corporatist sort of model where all of the railroad companies and the railroad unions are having a dispute, and the state comes in and just basically squashes the whole thing without giving the workers any of their demands. At the very least, you could say it's undemocratic, right? It's not representing the broad interests of the workers, which is another argument as how you could probably say it's fascist as well, is basically just saying this is super illiberal, super undemocratic, totally like ignores probably the desire of many of the constituents of people in Congress.
Right.
And yet they're basically just coming in and squashing the whole thing. So I understand the disagreement you guys are having, but I guess I would say you could make an argument that it's definitely connected to fascism, even just on an economic basis or even just on a philosophical one.
A couple things in reply to that. You can say it is undemocratic definitionally, and that makes it authoritarian, as I said. But, I'm not sure if you were the one arguing this, non-smoker. I don't think you were. But saying that something being undemocratic makes it fascist does not compute. That's not true.
I agree with that, actually.
Okay.
I don't think undemocratic always equals fascist.
Right.
I think that, oddly, though, most liberals believe that. Most liberals will call Trump a fascist for January 6th, but then they'll see Biden do something that's super undemocratic, or a Democratic Congress or Senate do something that's super undemocratic and totally, ignores the interests of the groups involved, or the broad masses involved in a piece of legislation, and just, well, in this case, like hammer the workers and say, well, that's not fascist, but, January 6th is, or something that the Republicans did is fascist because they're, like the overturning Roe v. Wade is fascist because it's ignoring it's undemocratic and it's taking away people's rights, this, that, and the other. So I wouldn't make that argument, but it's weird because a lot of liberals would, and yet they don't consider this fascist.
So to be completely fair, the two things that you just listed, January 6th and then voting to stop the railroad union strikes, those two things hold two completely different connotations and have two completely different contexts that I will happily talk to you after this, but because that's not the kind of discussion that we're having right now. But I want to talk to you about that.
Well, what I will say,
fine. But sorry, Luder, go ahead.
real quick, is that we have somewhat straight off the topic. It seems like, in a way, Alec has conceded at least part of the debate when it comes to the fascism conversation. So, I mean, if y'all want to go off topic for a little bit or talk about other things, it's totally fair game at this point, I would say.
I mean,
Like I said, I came in here not knowing. Anyway,
It's fascist.
All I'll say to Alpha is, look, hippie Jesus, whatever you're calling yourself, man. I recognize that they're three very different things with different implications and at different levels of severity for different people. Totally get it. I'm suggesting there's a common thread between all of them in that they're all examples of things that are undemocratic. And I'm kind of trying to point to the hypocrisy of liberals who get very outraged in cases where maybe they rightfully should be outraged that the government is doing undemocratic things. Like, I think overturning Roe v. Wade is super undemocratic, and everybody should be outraged about that. But they'll say that's fascist, and that's this, and that's that. And then Biden will do something to override, the collective wishes of, a major group of laborers, and that's not fascist. And to me, neither is fascist. It's just, the government being totalitarian at will. I actually think all systems, to some extent, are authoritarian or totalitarian. Just a matter of how much, when, and where you draw the line. But yeah, so that's how I'd respond.
And I think a lot of liberal fascism, we end up seeing...
I'm going to give Alec or Hippie a second here to respond.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess the only thing that I can respond with is the way that the railroad strikes are happening right now, and the way that the government was able to vote against it was because we voted those representatives in. And way back in the 1920s, when the law was passed that allowed this to happen, they voted those congressmen and senators in back then too. So it wasn't an undemocratic. We voted those people in. They voted on legislation, and then today they voted in favor of that legislation.
Is it me or Alec who's going?
I mean, Charmel, you wanna say something?
Cool.
Yeah, but I didn't
I'll
want
see
to
my
respond
time.
to that exactly. If somebody wanted, if Smoker wanted to respond to exactly what.
Yeah, I mean,
So
look,
go ahead.
so I would say, it depends. So I get where you're going with that, right? Like, you're trying to say the representatives are elected, so therefore anything they do must automatically be democratic. And now, when I put it like that, I would imagine you have an objection to that. And, I could argue, okay, overturning Roe was done by the Supreme Court. Those people weren't elected by the general public, but they were appointed by somebody who was elected by the general public. So therefore, that's a democratic action. What I'm trying to get at is the government, in this case, was passing legislation that, yes, technically affects everybody as consumers, but primarily affects one group of laborers. And their collective interests as a group, the government is perfectly willing to legislate against their collective interest, totally ignoring their democratic interests. And by the way, ignoring the interests of many of the constituents of these same representatives who elected them. many of whom would probably say, if polled, and I believe polling demonstrates this, that they're more than happy to give railroad workers the 7 days sick time. But in this case, it's like, well, we just have to avoid a strike, so we're just going to, force them back to work, and they don't get their sick time. We'll pass it through as another piece of legislation. We know it's not going to get through the Senate because we don't have enough votes for the filibuster. Fuck them. And I would imagine that's not in any way democratic. It's not what the constituents of the representatives would have wanted. It's not what the railroad workers would have wanted, obviously. It's what the railroad companies wanted, ultimately.
Can I go real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. Take some time.
I think regarding January 6th, you could argue it was a fascist move by the conservatives because of their ideology. I think taking the situation in a vacuum is a little bit misrepresenting it, because you can take over a Capitol building for a multitude of reasons. If it were a leftist takeover of the Capitol building, first of all, it wouldn't have gotten 99% of the way as far as it did. Second of all, or at least, switch that 1% of the way that it did. Second, if I'd have to analyze that specifically, but I think the ideology that you're pushing for is really important when it comes to the actions that you take, because overtaking the January 6th Capitol by itself is anti-democratic and authoritarian, but the context of Trump and his movement being blatantly anti-woman, blatantly anti-Muslim, blatantly anti-Mexican, et cetera, down the line, makes it fascist. I think that's the important distinction there.
Nah.
I mean, if you want to respond to that, Trimal, feel free, man. I'll give you some time.
Oh, no, I don't think it is. Again, it's the psychosis. Because ultimately, in fact, that kind of contradicts what you said earlier, because who were they going against, right? What demographic were they storming the Capitol for? They were doing it for themselves. They weren't doing it for anybody else. They wanted power, and they were willing to keep it, right? By threatening the bourgeois in power, which is incredible. It's an incredible feat, and it takes balls to do it. And honestly, that's an incredible thing, and it really shows that, yeah, the president, you were effectively America's governor. You can decarcerate so many people.
It's what being the president is.
Yeah, it's awesome. You have so much power. It's great. Well, so when you say things like, I'm worried that, such and such happened and these people stand up for their rights, what they think are their rights, just because you are politically opposed to them in a few ways, when we say politically, I'm being oppressed, now they're fascist. No, I think
when we say that just being a conservative does not automatically make somebody a fascist. I never said that. Now these days, I think I could make that argument fairly, 6th. But I'm not making that argument right now. What I am saying is that conservative ideology, the reason that I say that was a fascist attempt is because specifically their worldview is to otherize groups of people based on characteristics that are either beyond their control or religious in nature and not harming anybody.
Or outside of their family. If they're not in the family or in the state or in their
outside of their family
or outside of their working class. Yeah, their family. No. This country is is owned and run by families. And even worse, to the point of actual liberal fascism and conservative fascism, they label gangs, or they label families as gangs, right? This is what Hassan.
Wait, who does?
Wait, no.
Who? The cops.
Charmhole, you've not once substantiated any positive claim that you've made. This one, I'm going to need you to.
What?
Listen, as somebody who hates the police, I wouldn't put it past them, but I also don't think that's true. I've never seen them specifically label families as gangs.
Of course they have. What is a gang other than a family?
Maybe a gang can become a family.
Or a business. Or a business. How is a gang not a business?
Okay.
Again, it's contextual. It's the actions they partake in,
right? Yeah.
and the,
So
the
every time
attitudes
you
they
go
hold.
when you go to your stupid ass liberal ass fucking job, and they're like, "Okay, family, we're not like," they go to work at Olive Garden. When you're here, you're family, right? It's like,
Yeah,
coercive.
would you not say that Olive Garden's working class? Would you not say that any like restaurant jobs working class?
no, cooking, physical labor, absolutely, yeah, working class, serving. It's like a. It's
But
more
are they
like
not a part of the
bourgeois
proletariat too?
entertainment industry? Honestly, I've served a lot. I've bartended, and honestly, it's more of a bougie entertainment system, right? It's like you pretend to be somebody's slave, right? For a while, like be like, oh yes, you're so right. Please buy this wine and ask me about my life, like, you know.
Alec, can I ask you a
like-
question?
Of course.
What groups were the January 6th insurrectionists
The liberals,
othering?
the liberals, they othered the liberals.
That
How
moment,
could they?
none. In that moment,
I had to go to the
none.
bathroom and pick.
That's why I say context is important. It's not
exactly.
Do you assume they other?
absolutely. It's based off of the context of their beliefs.
No, which groups? Which groups?
Oh well, I mean, if it was, let's see, there were some Nazis there, so Jews, Mexicans, like I said, Muslims. I mean, Trump quite literally said he wanted to put a Muslim ban on, a Muslim immigration ban. Gay people to some extent, but not quite as much in 2020. Definitely trans people, considering Trump literally made legislation against them. A few others probably.
So, would it surprise you to learn that a few of the people arrested in connection with January 6th were gay and trans?
No.
So, the idea that like this was some large group with a collective interest is something I would kind of disagree with you on. I think that it was a hysterical riot of idiots with no discrete agenda whatsoever, who, by the way, in some instances were allowed in the building by Capitol Police. Now, I'm
Oh, no,
not
they weren't.
suggesting necessarily
Absolutely not.
that people in the Capitol wanted January 6th to happen, but I guess what I'm suggesting is that I really have a hard time acknowledging that this is some sort of like fascist attempted takeover of the government. I think it was an uncoordinated group of morons who broke into the building with, in some cases, little resistance, in other cases, resistance.
I want to.
Who basically, once they got inside, just sort of walked around.
Alex,
wanna
do you
pin
mind
down-
do you mind if I take something real quick?
Go ahead.
So, when you say that they were just let in, that's a completely bad faith argument because they weren't just let in just for the sake of being
I
let
actually
in.
do agree with that part, but I had another point I wanted to pin him down on. But go ahead.
But to
Yeah,
also,
why were they let in?
well, number one, like you have like I don't know if you watched the video, like it was live, like we saw the videos. They were
Of
let
course I
in.
saw
Like
the
there's
video.
there's the video of the one black security guard that led them through the halls to keep them away and to reroute them away from the sitting congressmen that were in the rooms or the senators that were in the room. Then you have the people that actually broke into the building. They were already in the building. So to say that they were just let in, they were literally like drawn in to be guided out. That's how
How'd that work?
riot control works.
Looked like it didn't really work, brother.
Well, guess what? We didn't lose any congressmen or senators, so it worked pretty goddamn well.
You could literally
Like,
see
that's
I don't
how
agree
riot
with you.
control
Just
Getting
get
them
works.
out of the building.
They opened
And
the
That's how,
gates.
wait, hold on. That's how riot control worked. Yeah, they were already in the fucking
Is
building,
that how it
Tom.
worked during Black
No.
Lives Matter?
No,
Yes,
Don't
that's
agree-
literally
to be
how
clear.
it worked in Black
Really,
Lives Matter. They
I
literally
remember seeing
rerouted.
people getting their heads stomped in and attacked by cops and pepper spray thrown
Yeah,
in the
but guess
crowd,
what? If you
rubber
actually,
bullets.
if you watch, I was there too. We were rerouted. I was there. Like, I'm pretty sure a
Right.
lot of the
But
people
do
that
you
I know
not
were
see-
there.
okay,
a lot
in
of the people
both
that were
cases-
non-smoker. You're gonna have to let me
Hippie
finish
Jesus,
the fucking
Hippie Jesus.
point.
Oh, you're
I
so
think at the very
mad.
least
That
you
is
have
how
to
that is
acknowledge.
how
Chill
riot
out,
control
bro.
You
works.
have to acknowledge
you
that the
literally
police
have to
half-assed
reroute
that.
people through the city so that parts of the city don't get destroyed. That's how crowd control works.
But you have to acknowledge at least that the police half-assed that at the very least. Like,
Yeah, I don't.
like there's no
whether
way.
or not they half-assed it or not, they still attempted it. They
There
still
were
did it.
police who showed up.
But I'm explaining
more
how
were in the
crowd
crowd.
control is supposed to work, and that is what happened in January 6th. They were let in to be rerouted
Why
away
weren't?
from
Where were all the
Congress.
police at? Where were they at?
Are we really going to pull the like Nancy Pelosi didn't approve them?
No, I'm saying they were in the fucking crowd, dude. They were part of the mob.
Not
They took the
but
day off
people
work,
that were
and they-
there,
they went to the
people
January
that
6th
were
insurrection.
There were following the proper crowd control like measures.
There weren't
You
that
can
many.
say that, and maybe they were. I don't know, but they did not have nearly the police force that they should have. I think that the ones who were there, at least a few of them, probably did put up a
So,
decent fight. I mean, people got killed.
The reason
But,
why Trump got away with this, the reason why this was able to happen at all, is because Washington, D.C., as a district, as we all know, is not a state, right? So, because of this, the president ends up effectively being the mayor/governor of the city of Washington, D.C. So, the reason why there was nobody to stop them is because the president, who was supposed to call in the National Guard, and I just thought of this too. I think it'd be interesting. I hope some of you know, but we might have to look it up. If Washington, D.C., like as a county, has like a SWAT team or like some kind of variant. I don't actually know, but it'd be interesting to find that out. And I'm surprised nobody's really talked about that. But again, the reason why it was so easy, why they could just walk in, is because Trump was the one to call the National Guard. He didn't do it. Like, it's just that easy. Like, how were they able to get that far? Because the president let them, effectively.
If I could,
that's, I think, what
I wanted to pin non-smoker down on something from earlier that he said. He asked me if I don't believe that gay people got arrested for being in the crowd. Obviously, gay people were there, and obviously black people were there, and maybe even Muslim people and whatever, and Mexican people. Of course they were.
Some Asians.
Do you think that there were no Jews in Nazi Germany by Hitler's side?
Whoa.
Yeah, but okay, I acknowledge that there were Jews in Nazi Germany who supported the Nazi Party at different times, but you do see like the major difference there.
No.
Okay, well, in Nazi Germany, there was this thing called the Holocaust, where they actually killed like millions of fucking people.
Oh my
and
God!
January 6th was a group. Well, the point I'm trying to get across to you is that this was a group of hysterical people with no discrete agenda whatsoever, and they broke into this building, and I think they vaguely thought, yeah, we're gonna tell the government that Trump should have won, or the election is wrong, or whatever. But I think I just have never bought into this idea that this was some sort of coordinated attempt to force anybody in government to overturn the election. It just seemed to be like a riot, basically.
I think that's a half-truth. I think that it was in large part a crazy riot with little coordination. But there was some coordination. We have records, online records of people posting back and forth to each other about how they're going to January 6th. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure they found people looking at the Capitol building. I'm going to drop that part because I'm not 1,000% on it. But there were coordinated efforts from groups, I believe, like the Proud Boys and some others, to make sure that there were conservative people who showed up. The mob was there to reinstall Trump, right? That was their unifying kind of goal. They wanted to reinstall Trump. So if we want to ascertain whether or not this was a fascist attempt, we have to look at the ideology of Trump and of his followers and decide, does this constitute a fascist takeover, or was it simply a violent mob going crazy at the Capitol? You know what I mean?
No, Trump himself said for them to stand down and stand back. So, even though he didn't call in the National Guard.
Look, my whole thing is, I think it's at the very least hyperbole to say this was like a fascist coup. I mean, the biggest issue I've always had with that is that none of these rioters were armed. And when I say coordinated, what I mean is like, there may have been people who planned, yes, we're going to storm the Capitol building, but I guess coordinated in any kind of sophisticated way, where they had like an agenda, like, okay, we're going to break in the building, and then we're going to do this, and when we do this, it's going to lead to that.
And then we're going to hang Mike Pence.
Their plan was to kill some of the people in there. You can't tell me if they had found AOC that they would not have killed her, or at least tied her up and tried to like hold her in a cage.
No,
they absolutely would have.
Oh my God! Did they
were
do
literally
that?
Shouting, "Kill Mike Pence" or "Hang Mike Pence."
To be fair, I do think crowds become hysterical and things happen. So, I mean, I don't know, but I don't think most of the people who were there, like the old ladies in the crowd, were like there to murder AOC. You know what I mean?
Even if they weren't there specifically, individually to do that, as you said, crowds tend to have a way of getting hysterical. Your mob mentality is a very strong driver. So I think the people who were largely leading this, the extremist conservative groups, were kind of banking on that.
The group of individuals that you were attempting to say that they like tried to fascistly take out, like, it's the biggest minority in America. It's Congress. Like, okay, yeah, so they tried to hate crime Congress, which again, there were no weapons there. Like, they didn't assault or kill anybody. There were a bunch of cops who committed suicide that day, which is honestly pretty weird on both sides, but whatever. There's like literally, like, honest to God, I think like the total count afterwards, it was like 6 cops died total. It was like 3 that day. And like
6 people total.
Oh yeah,
I don't think it was
5
6
cops,
cops.
and then yeah, that Amy chick or that Ashley or whatever. So yeah, well, but that's the thing, right? Is like they didn't. There was no focus. The only focus was election fraud. Actually, a lot of people don't really think about that, but election fraud was one of the biggest topics that they were like going to fight.
But
because
again,
what happened the day before was the runoff election for Georgia, or like the official recount or whatever. And the day before that, January 6th, on January 5th, that's when Democrats won the Senate because of Georgia. Right? Like nobody talks about that, which is really weird, but that was like the day before, and everybody's like, they were like, this is rigged, like they fucked everything up, which again, admittedly is a huge loss, but it's a reaction to the loss. It's not, let's go lynch Congress or let's go lynch a specific group of people, right? It's, we're mad we lost, and then you have liberals, like the liberal socialists is trying to like convince their own base, like, these guys are the real Nazis, and it's like, well, that's just because they don't want to figure out that.
But you're saying that it's like January 5th. Like, they didn't just start planning the day before. Like that's been a planned thing for like weeks in advance.
Yeah, but that's how it got so big. Is because they lost.
No, that's not true. Just because something happened on January 5th doesn't mean that was like the main cause. That really
cause and effect doesn't exist. I forgot.
But you're making a causal link to a lost election. A state election, a Senate election. That's not what they were mad about.
They literally stormed the Senate.
They literally stormed the Senate over what happened in the national election. That's literally what happened.
Yeah, the Senate election and the presidential. It can be both. It can be both.
People there with like zip ties and shit.
It can be both, bro.
Turnbull, this is not about being both. You're literally making that you're making that the straw that broke the camel's back. That's not at all what happened. It was literally started over Trump's denial of loss. That is the reason why the flame was stoked.
Yeah. So the election
that were literally the presidential, not the Senate runoff election.
Both.
No.
Yes.
No, you're saying that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That's not at all it.
I'm saying that's the gas that ignited the fire.
No, it's not. Because people were already gassed up. People were already planning to go. People were already planning to kidnap. People were already planning to kill. People were already planning to hang.
They were in the car. They had to get gassed up.
Like, dude, like you're being
They were
so
already, of course they were going to go, but the whole reason they got mad.
They were already stoked. They were already mad.
Bro, why do you pretend like you weren't online? Like you weren't terminally online January 5th and January 6th?
You know
I was there too, bro. You were literally there. You were literally there, and you're like trying to defend them. You know what? It's so weird.
I wasn't. No, okay, Charmhole, you're making the same disingenuous like mistake that a lot of your audience members or even non-smokers, maybe even Alex, are making. I never said I was at J6. I said I was at BLM protests. Get it? Like get caught up. Stop eating and actually pay attention. So the fact that you were saying that J5 was the stoking of the flames that happened that made J6 happen. That's just not true. They were already mad because of the national election that happened months prior.
I'm with Jesus on this one.
Why are you so mad about that? If it's not true, then why are you so mad?
Because you're literally like just stoking ridiculous ideas right now.
Okay, then give me a proper account. Instead of just saying I'm wrong, why don't you have like a proper argument?
I'm not mad. I'm gonna tell you,
because
you're
you
wrong.
don't prove anything.
All right.
How am I wrong?
It was the losing. Yes, it was the losing of the election that was kind of the powder keg. Well, let me put it this way. It was the lighting of the powder keg, right? And then the rope was all the way leading toward the January 6th insurrection, which was the powder keg at the end. That started when it was official.
You should feel bad because the election
Good
would have been
fucking
the
argument.
filling up. No, here's a better analogy. The loss of the election would have been the filling of the powder keg, because you need some black powder in the keg for it to explode.
Fine.
So if you just
That's
light
fine.
a powder keg
But
without
that's
no
fine.
powder in there, it's not going to explode. So
But then
your
you
analogy
admit they
sucks.
were preparing, right?
Yeah. No shit.
Okay.
Obviously.
Okay, I think that was Hippie's whole point, is that they had been preparing from the point that Trump lost.
And
Am I wrong?
the election fraud was already going on strong. And then the day before, thanks to mail-in ballots, Georgia went blue, which was fucking huge.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
There you go.
Vote by mail a
How,
lot.
how is
Yeah.
that not the lighting of the powder keg?
So before
Because,
we
Because
it was,
that was
they were
too
already
deep down this rabbit hole,
there.
guys, y'all settle down. Like, before we go too deep down this rabbit hole, I'm all for it. We're just slightly past
that's
the
too
hour,
late.
the hour mark at this point. So y'all are free to stick around and keep debating if you want. But I did say an hour earlier, so if anybody wants to leave at this point, they're free to do so. If you want to stay and hang out and keep debating, that's totally fine too. But I just want to give you all the chance to give your closing and get out of here if y'all want to leave. It's up to
Let
y'all.
Chad vote.
Yeah, who won? Who lost? Looter, you also have
I
to
won.
say. You were a neutral position. You were a great moderator, but you also have to pick a side. Just saying. But also,
I mean, if you
my
want-
final statement is: thanks for watching. Thanks for Looter, non-smoker, you guys for setting this up, and of course the guys that are agreeing to argue or just hate against Charmhole. It happens all the time. Happens everywhere. I know I'm spicy. I know I'm schizophrenic. That's because I am so smart. I'm a grand champion in Rocket League. My neurons are faster than most people's. I'm just on it. I'm fast. I eat a lot. I'm tall. I'm blonde. I'm big. I'm beefy. Kanye 2024. Communism in America right now. Yesterday. It's already here. We just need to wake up. We got to get the old Bernie bros. Tell them the real communism is conservatism, and just switch parties. Say fuck it to the Democrats. Democrats spent $1 billion against their own party to beat Bernie Sanders. Fuck them. Communism's here. Liberalism, or fascism, is the psychosis of liberalism. And that is a quote not from Alexander Dugin, which I had convinced Doobie's Politics server it was, and nobody disagreed. Nobody second guessed. It is not a quote from Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher. It is actually a quote from Haas from Infrared. So make sure to follow him, follow me, Charmhole, and follow the fellows here. Thanks for watching.
Real quick before anybody else closes out, is anybody leaving? Alec, are you heading out? Non-smoker, you guys heading out?
I got nothing going on.
All right, well,
I think I'll head out at this point. I got some other stuff to do. But Charmhole, you put up a really good debate. I think I clearly lost this one to you, buddy. I will heavily think about my worldview and where I stand on positions such as what led to January 6th, as well as MAGA communism. It sounds exciting. So, like I said, my name is Alec Gunter. You can find me at twitch.tv/Alec Gunter, as well as youtube.com/Alec Gunter TTV. I had fun. This was good content, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
yeah, thanks for coming out.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm gonna open the panel up to 8 people now. That's like a semi-open panel. So if anybody in any of y'all's chats wants to hop in, just hop in my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/s_looter. Just type !! Discord.
Bro,
and get you
I don't get
verified
to
and
make
y'all
a
can hop
closing statement?
in. You can, but you're not leaving before
We're
you
gonna
leave.
allow 8
Yeah.
people in here?
Wait, they got to make their closing statement.
Hey! Before I let anybody in, I'm giving y'all a chance to close. All right, go ahead, non-smoker. I just want to get that out there first.
Right, thank you. Look, I'm just gonna say it's so obvious I won. But second of all, you guys are all cool. I wanted to have like a civil discussion. I felt like we basically did. And again, I think a lot of my argument is just grounded in the idea that we use labels totally detached from the context in which they developed, and that's a problem. And we should probably not do that. But the way that we get around doing that, or stop doing that, is have conversations like this where we all are, if we're not more informed by the conversation itself, then we're at least incentivized to inform ourselves more.
Yeah.
All right, Hippie, go ahead and give your closing, bud.
Yeah. So, Non-smoker won for his team. Charmhold didn't substantiate anything he fucking said, and that seems to be a pattern with this fucking Neanderthal. Yeah,
Agreed.
you can find me at
Coke
twitch.tv/Alpha Wasabi, and go subscribe to Non-Smoker.
All right, sweet. Yeah, that concludes the debate. I'm gonna open up the room. Y'all are free to stick around, or if you want to leave, it's your prerogative.
Alec,
Y'all have a
DM
great
me
night.
if you want to talk again about that Russia shit.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sure thing, man. All right. I'll see y'all later. Good night.
He's a charming boy.
Boom,
Where
baby.
are the rest of these madmen?